Hello everyone and welcome. I will be criticizing Jonathan McIntosh's recent contribution to feminist frequency and his videos, 5 Ways Men Can Help and Sexism. This is more of a vlog than anything else because I'm limited on time. Let me start by issuing a quick fair use notice. It is listed right here on Feminist Frequency's video itself. They've used copyrighted material. Just so we know, Section 107 should have me covered. But before we waste any more time, let's get to it.
For many men, it can be hard to know exactly what role we can or should play in working towards an end to sexism.
$400,000 plus, and the quality is the same.
How can men help, and how much or how little should we be helping? In this video, we will explore answers to those questions and share a few suggestions about how men can respectfully approach feminism and, critically, explain why it's beneficial for men to be involved.
How men can help and how should men help? What if the answer is men shouldn't help? What if this is a battle that women can do on their own? Remarkable how we must think that regularly from the feminist extremists here that it's important for men to contribute. If a man has an issue, he's expected to solve it himself, even within feminist circles. If a woman has an issue, the male allies must support her. It's this fantastic doublethink that this community has grown into having. But I'm sure John will let us know what's going on a little more particularly.
First things first. Because there's so much misinformation about feminism floating around out there in the cultural ether, it's useful to quickly define what that term actually means.
Ether doesn't exist, just like misinformation about feminism. Facts about feminism do not constitute misinformation if the facts do not align with one's particular interpretation of feminism. If someone has facts against feminism, that's not wrong. They're facts. How you interpret them matters. Chances are we're going to see Jonathan put forward some obsequious definition that actually doesn't constitute anything beyond what he likes to do as a quick workaround. And just like how you could define a religion like Christianity with a simple sentence, we know that its practices and how its adherents engage in those practices actually matters more.
Feminism is a socio-political movement with the central goal of ending sexism and dismantling gender-based oppression.
What if sexism is a 2-to-1 hiring ratio in STEM fields for women, where women are favored, thanks to a Cornell University study, in obtaining jobs in STEM fields? That's gender-based discrimination. That's sexism. So are we going to see the next video from Jonathan McIntosh on a non-gaming related subject talking about how the STEM field needs to reassess its hiring practices? Probably not.
So contrary to common misconceptions, feminism is not about man-hating or female supremacy. It's important to note that
I like his soft look face there, the chin down, the eyebrows up, letting you know that he is not a threat and that maybe you should listen to Mom.
feminist endeavor, as it's been defined by women like bell hooks, does not simply seek equal access for women within current systems of power, but instead seeks to transform those systems and the values associated with them.
So you obtain equality within the current system, the usual jest of name me a law that grants more rights to men that is not available for women, or conversely show me a law that supports women's rights more so than men's rights. The current system has already provided equality. There's no argument about this point. Time to move the goalposts. Time to start saying maybe the system needs to change wholly in order to obtain better equality, because equal opportunity is not good enough. We need equal outcome.
So where do men fit into all of this? Well, Women have long been pointing out the ways in which men can benefit from feminism, and actively calling for men's participation in working towards ending sexism.
Long have the workers let known to the proletariat how socialism can benefit them. They've just done so in a non-nagging tone. Why do men need to benefit from a system which actively seeks out to undermine the very basis of what men find to be defining to their masculinity? Numerous examples can be put forth here, but we just need to consider the simple fact that when you listen to a conversation on, we'll say, a men's issue of circumcision being legal in the United States to do to infants, female genital mutilation, on the other hand, not legal. When you bring up the topic of circumcision and wanting to maybe address the difference in legality between men and women and the medical effects of circumcision, a feminist will let you know how terrible female genital mutilation is and how we have to focus on female genital mutilation as a way to distract from the actual topic at hand and to focus on women's issues. Men benefit? I don't think so.
As Bell Hooks writes in her landmark 1984 book, Feminist Theory from Margin to Center, like women, men have been socialized to passively accept sexist ideology. While they need not blame themselves for accepting sexism, they must assume responsibility for eliminating it. Men are not exploited or oppressed by sexism, but there are ways in which they suffer as a result of it. That bears repeating. Men are not exploited or oppressed by sexism.
Men are not exploited or oppressed by sexism, in yet another strange definition of feminism. It really comes across that feminism is entirely about the empowerment of women, not about dismantling current structures that can be oppressive to gender in general. When you start talking about how men cannot suffer from institutional sexism, but you see examples, like illustrated from the Cornell study I just mentioned, of hiring practices which favor women simply to put more women in those roles over other individuals who are otherwise completely qualified to fill those roles. To me, that would indicate some form of sexism that men can suffer under, and rather than men just being completely immune to sexism. When we start buying into what Bell Hooks believes, we start to accept that men have to just shut up and accept how things are. If the world changes, shut up and accept it. If it stays the same, keep quiet and keep accepting it. You have no place at this table to discuss it. Everything else will be determined for you. It doesn't seem very inviting to continue the conversation where there's men involved.
But there are ways in which we suffer as a result of it. We are taught early on that boys don't cry, that to show sensitivity or emotional vulnerability is a sign of weakness. Men are discouraged from practicing nurturing, caregiving, compassion, and compromise for the same reasons.
Men are discouraged from learning compassion. Isn't a very solid argument. I don't know very many men in my personal existence that have been entirely cold to me at a time in my life where it truly mattered. This idea that men are, in general, emotionally empty. They suppress their emotions so much entirely that they don't even experience them, let alone internalize and pathologize them, is utterly insane. There's no really other way to put it. This is a disconnect from reality when you sit down and you start to talk about how we expect men in society to be a certain way. You provide a huge example of men not being that way, men who are trying to engage more, be more compassionate, more interested in the outcomes of others, more into cooperation, while just being steadfast in their beliefs, that's immediately changed to those men being emotionally disconnected. A.C. Grayling, for example, is a deeply compassionate individual. A man who does significant lectures to other men about the importance of being compassionate and spreads a very humanist worldview. Humanism, however, is an entirely different entity from feminism. Thankfully so. Feminism wants you to continue to believe that men are cold, distant, don't care, and as such, not that they aren't just engaged in the system, but they are willfully perpetuating the harms that exist. Humanism completely discounts that view by focusing on the elevation of all by way of protecting everyone's rights, protecting everyone's person, promoting compassion. But hey, men, they're dangerous because they don't have feelings.
There's an enormous amount of pressure placed on men to prove our manhood by acting tough, projecting strength, and repressing our emotions.
So we want to be tough. Why do we want to be tough? Because the world's competitive. If the world's not competitive, then what is the place of the traditional man? And I don't just mean traditional man in the sense of the American 1950s strong forearms, strong upper lip man. I mean the traditional man as borne out by evolution. But we're not shocked by this. Feminism has completely discounted evolution, doesn't really believe in it. Feminists are pretty much creationists in that we are poofed into existence, tabula rasa, socialized into believing things, including how big your chest is. If you're a man, how big your arms are, how tall you get, how strong you are. And for women, the size of your lips, the size of your hips, and the size of your breasts. All socialized. Seems utterly insane. Now, back to the point about evolution and shaping us. Men must project strength and emotional balance in order to be successful in a very competitive environment with other men. There are several reasons for this, but looking just at a mate selection one in a consumptive psychology form, we're looking at being able to protect women during gestation and child rearing so that our genes can move on. It doesn't matter if you are a human male, a chimpanzee male, or even a rodent male. Your role as a mammal, male mammal, is to continually protect the female part of the population so that your genetics can move on. You can't socialize the vast majority of animals on this planet that engage in these kind of behaviors. And it's not just seen in mammals, we see it in avians also. It's not uncommon for male birds to be very brightly colored. This serves a twofold purpose. First being a brightly colored male, the most common one being a peacock, shows that, look how bright I am. I am so visible, predators would find me an easy target, but I'm still here. Look at my plumage, I can fan it out, I can make myself an even larger target, even more visible, but I'm still here. That communicates survivability, strength. That's the outward projection of strength by a male peacock. The bright colors also help to distract predators away from the very camouflaged females. Time and again we see this, whether it's peahens, female cardinals is another great example of this. Those birds blend in. Female birds are meant to be camouflaged. Male birds are bright. They are to draw the dangers of the world towards them. This is something that had to be, in an evolutionary sense, developed to preserve a species. And without it, we wouldn't be here to even build a society at that point. Men are the ones who wear the bright plumage going into battle while the women stay behind the walls. It was men who died by scores to protect the city where the women and children were. Without that drive built into us in an evolutionary sense, those cities would have been razed, the women would have been killed, and that society would cease to exist. If that was the case when we were fighting, when we were still primates, we wouldn't be humans today. There would be no humanity. There would be no civilization. It's just something to consider that we are not tabula rasa coming out of nowhere. We are evolved creatures with very particular traits and behaviors built into our psyche that we cannot just immediately separate from. What makes us unique as humans is we're the ones separate from apes that can recognize our place and change our behavior to better suit our environment rather than letting evolution take its course. So yes, men project strength, but men have to cooperate to do so to preserve our society. That's not inherently a dangerous thing, or, as said time and again, a toxic element of masculinity.
This is compounded by the fact that men are often more admired for being aggressive, dominant, and violent than for being cooperative.
It's Jonathan's brother. Look at that guy. Pudgy, potato, big old ears, bit of a goofy smile. Oh yeah, there's got to be some relation there. Probably admires his brother. That's why he's showing this clip. But honestly, look at what he said. We're admired for being violent. If you want to change that language just a bit, you go from being violent to being willing to protect. If you are in a home as a man with your girlfriend, your wife, your partner, even if it's a male partner, what would be more admired? Sorry, I'm a gine, I'm a pacifist, I'm a nonviolent person. I don't think violent is appropriate in our current civilization or our current social structure. I think violence is socialized into us. As an intruder is wanting to steal your belongings and views you as a defender and a threat. A pacifist will not do well in that situation. Therefore, men who tend to stand up and protect what's theirs, protect their rights, even if it's another person. Sure, it's not property, but it's that person's safety that they are protecting. That is admired. And yes, violence may be a part of that. But being strong, projecting strength, standing up for what you believe can greatly diffuse these situations where you have imminent threat to individuals who matter to you. A man who cowers does not get that respect, rightfully so.
Vulnerable and empathetic. Not only is all of this damaging behavior encouraged,
It looks like those men are being pretty cooperative right now. I mean, they have firearms and they're not killing each other. They are men after all. They're cold, they completely lack empathy, and they are just looking to find their ends by whatever means necessary. And these men who carry firearms may be an imminent risk to them, so I'm surprised they haven't just killed each other. Because they're men.
in individual men, but those same values are also reflected in our larger political and military institutions.
Our larger political and military institutions reflect the sense that men need to be inherently violent, cold, and calculated. That seems like a very strange jump to get to from the sense that men are raised to be tough, to not show emotion, and now we are inherently violent as a result of being disconnected from emotion, and that is entirely abused by the current system of military institutions and political institutions, that it's a driving force behind that. The logic fails me even when I piece it out in this manner. Men are not violent because they're emotionless. Men are not violent just because they're men. Violence is an aspect of society in general. Violence is an aspect of humanity. It's about being an animal in general. We will engage in violent acts in a variety of scenarios. There's a reason why we derive a certain degree of entertainment when we watch sports like football, despite an overwhelming amount of evidence that each one of those hits that a football player takes has a severe consequence on the integrity of their brain. We watch them. They're violent. They're an outlet for us. We play violent video games because they're an outlet for us. We go hunting because it's an outlet for us. There's many things we do that are violent that are not inherently bad for society. This thought, this continual theme of masculinity, anything that we can pin on masculinity as being inherently toxic, inherently bad, and you try and take that thread and match it up with the one where McIntosh is going on about it's not about man-hating, feminism's not about man-hating. Well, then why do you lay out the argument of masculinity is bad? All elements of masculinity is bad. You should focus on feminism. Well, if masculinity is bad and you associate all men who are not feminists with being hyper-masculine, then what you're saying is feminism hates men. It is about man-hating. There's no doubt about it. You cannot jump off that bridge and then say the ground will protect me. You have to see the difference here between saying it's not about man-hating and actually not being man-hating. Just because you invite guys in doesn't mean they're accepted. Just because a guy can come up and say I'm a feminist but be ridiculed and more or less ostracized, be turned to a pariah simply because he believes in some other very traditional masculine roles, tells me that feminism, modern feminism, even your current definition of feminism provided, goes over in great detail on how it will not accept maleness in it. That's completely contrary to breaking down gender-based oppression. It's completely contrary to the statement that it is not about man-hating.
Often to disastrous effect. So while men as a group are afforded gender-based privileges at the expense of women,
expense of women? Gender-based privileges? You know, we have laws against that, right? And we really can sue people for that. We're a litigious nation. There's nothing stopping lawyers from doing that. I can see I caught you off guard and you're shocked by this point.
A product of patriarchy is that it also causes real harm to men's well-being.
And we have finally started the 5 tips for men. All of that precursor aside. Patriarchy doesn't exist. Hasn't existed for many, many years. We broke that down when we decided that we are rational creatures and that society can be built in a stable way if we start with education and have people drive for a scientific endeavor to improve society. Sure, support roles are required for that, but if we drive ahead humanity by way of education in the arts and sciences, in literature and history, we can greatly reduce the inherent violence within our society. This is something that has been proven for now centuries. We've seen murder rates, rape rates, break-and-enters, violent assaults. All of these have dropped in the last 40 years. It should come as no surprise that with education coming in, we have less violence. The more ubiquitous real education is, the less violence there is.
Okay, so if we're on board with ending sexism, what specifically can we do as men?
Sexism, still undefined at this point. Still undefined. Sexism is what a woman feels to be sexist, what can be perceived as sexist. It's entirely arbitrary and subjective. So, am I on board for ending sexism? Yeah, who isn't? I have yet to meet a person who isn't. For the most part, people want to end sexism for both genders, though, and don't want to malign one gender for being inherently narcissistic, histrionic, psychotic, as feminists tend to say about men, and their psychopathic, cold, antisocial stats.
To be helpful. Here's our quick list of 5 tips for respectfully engaging with feminism as men. Listen to women.
Listen to your mother.
Now that might seem really obvious, but far too often men have a hard time just listening to what women have to say and respecting women's knowledge and experiences. Because of the way we're socialized to think of our voices as most important, men have a tendency to interrupt and interject ourselves into conversations and then to dominate those interactions.
I'm gonna let you finish, but
This behavior is so ingrained that men often don't even realize we're doing it, which is why it's critical to learn how to take a step back, to try not to interrupt, and instead actively listen and absorb what is being said before responding. Now, of course, this does not mean you have to agree with everything every individual woman says. No one person's perspective can ever represent all of feminism or the experiences of all women.
let's reverse those roles for a second. Men and women both suffer from being raised in this myopic aggrandizement of themselves, where their voice is the most important voice, that their experiences are the most important experiences. It's a human failing that we so frequently generalize what we feel to be ourselves to the very same experiences as others. There's a regular joke that comes out of somewhere like Reddit where, am I the only one that? The simple answer is no, you're not the only one that. And those kind of facets of our natural myopic sense, to the point that we even recognize other people have similar experiences or different experiences, that we still try to keep it focused on ourselves, should be an indication that it is not just a male trait to want to dominate a conversation, to just focus on our own experiences. And when we hear a statement from someone that is an entire disconnect from what we actually have experienced ourselves, and we want to impress that fact on the speaker, we're being told now that that's inappropriate. You shouldn't do that. That's bad because women are harmed by this. I don't see that link. I don't see how you can say that's problematic in your fancy social justice terms and flip it around and telling women they just need to shut up and listen to men. If a man is suffering, they need to be quiet and they need to listen to the man, and they shouldn't interject and they shouldn't interrupt, and they should actually wait till he has made his whole point before interrupting. Do you think that's possible? Do you really think that that's going to work, especially talking to feminists about issues that affect men? I don't really think so. And this is the kind of inherent sexism that exists within feminism. It is a double standard where men are rude for interjecting, men are the ones who are doing the negative acts, but it is women who are suffering from it. That women don't interject, that women don't project, that women don't overstep or fail to listen. It is only men who do this. I understand the video is about how men can help, but the impression I'm left with here is women don't do this, men do this, and therefore that's a problem, and that's one thing that's slowing down the spread of the ideology.
It simply means that we, as men, are not in a position to define feminism for women.
You defined it earlier. Yeah, right here. See? You read this part aloud. Yourself. Without a citation. So where did you get this from? Without a citation, I think you're defining it. And you're applying it to all. That doesn't seem very nice.
Woman says, no one person's perspective can ever represent all of feminism or the experiences of all women. It simply means that we, as men, are not in a position to define feminism for women, and that we should actively pay attention to women's voices, because for so long, women's experiences, women's perspectives, and women's ideas have been dismissed, ignored, and silenced.
Some women's ideas and experiences have been dismissed and or ignored. Not all women's. It's a big difference. And frankly, I don't really care to hear about the individual stories of women who have experienced what they feel to be some type of injustice because they couldn't sit down on a bus because there was a man sitting down. I've been on the receiving end of that. Not too long after my back surgery, I was not able to walk that well, and I was using a power scooter inside of a Fred Meyer. I was confronted by a woman saying I shouldn't play around on the machinery like a kid. How empathetic. The assumption that I'm a man, I must be perfectly healthy, and if I engage in something, it's just because I'm dicking around. That's the experience that I've had. How about you?
It's especially vital to listen to women of color, particularly black and indigenous women.
Did one lose a seat on a bus? Oh, right, segregation's not back yet, so we don't need another wave to fight it.
Because, as feminist scholars have long pointed out, sexism is compounded when it's combined with racism and
Feminist scholars. Feminist scholars. Feminist scholars.
other forms of oppression. Back in 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality as part of her theory to describe these layered experiences that leave some women more disenfranchised than others.
It's the fantastic intersectionality feminism, or fourth wave feminism, the modular version of feminism, rather than third wave all about patriarchy being the overarching theme where you have men versus women, which is where Jonathan McIntosh still seems to be firmly grounded. You have fourth wave feminism, the intersectionality modular, where you can flip on and off different aspects of identity to determine different degrees of either privilege or oppression. Some men can be terribly oppressed because they're Arab men, they're fat men, they're old men, they're veterans, they are gay men. Oh, but if they are a man, they still have infinitely more privilege than a woman. And so they play this fun little game where we'll say there's 5 elements for each person: their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, their age, and their fitness. And if we're taking a woman versus a man, what we'll do is we'll ignore all of 4 of the aspects beyond gender, and for the woman, we'll look at all 5 if they are somehow lesser than what the man's is, to show how oppressed that woman is. If you want to talk about women versus women, what we'll do is, well, gender's out of the question, so now we have 4 points left. We're going to look at their fitness. We're going to look at their age. We're going to look at their sexual orientation. We're going to look at the color of their skin. And then we're going to have this game where we continually flip on and off modules to determine who's the most oppressed. It has nothing to do with solving anything. It is an entire internal, cliquey, echo chamber conversation of figuring out some type of pointless hierarchy of a house of cards that'll just topple over once they actually try and get out in the real world and make those statements en masse. At least I hope. I hope we don't see people starting to go to employers and telling them to their faces, you need to be focused on women of color when it comes to hiring and give them certain advantages because of being women of color. That doesn't seem like a system that actually promotes equality by any measure. Shitlord, educate
It's important for
yourself.
us, as men, to acknowledge that when we talk about feminism, we follow the lead of women. Yet while feminist ideas do originate with women, that does not mean that it's the responsibility of every woman to teach all men about sexism. So we shouldn't go around interrogating or demanding answers from women. Instead, we should be proactive in doing the work ourselves by committing to continuous lifelong learning.
That is red pill as fuck. Not the first half of that, but you should be committed to lifelong improvement through education. That is Marcus Aurelius right there. That is stoic. That is the Meditations. I've stunned him again. Seriously, this is an interesting little blurb that he's come up with here. We are the ones responsible for our own education. But within this ideology, if you start learning about things outside of the dogma, you are part of the problem. You're not looking to improve the situation. You are not allowed to go read and look into information from another source outside of the dogma. That's inappropriate, because what it does is it just shows how much you're still part of the system, how much you are buying into the dogma of the non-patriarchy. You're a problematic person if you do that. Although that sentiment within itself is really interesting, being that it is entirely I want to say a very male element, where we say that we are responsible for our own education, that we shouldn't rely on others, that we should be internally responsible. We are the only ones that can determine our education, and we're the only ones that can either learn more or choose not to. But, you should stop and listen to women endlessly so you can learn from them, despite whether or not you want to hear it.
Lucky for us, over the past century, feminist scholars have written volumes on the topic.
I'm going to skip this part. It's more or less just a book review of a series of different books. There's nothing really interesting there. The video will be in the description below.
The place where men can be most helpful in regards to feminism is first within ourselves and then amongst other men. Patriarchy...
Again, despite the feminist part there, but men are responsible for themselves. Men can improve their society as long as they focus inward on themselves and improve from there outward. That is another Aurelian trait. Did Jonathan McIntosh accidentally pick up the meditations before doing this and didn't realize it? I think the spell might be breaking.
Encourages men to buy into sexist thinking, and at the very least remain complacent in sexism through our silence. So instead, step off the path of least resistance and dare to make yourself and other men uncomfortable about sexism. Let the other men around you know that their sexist behavior is not okay. For example, when you stand up and say that a sexist joke is not funny, the men telling that joke can no longer be assured that they will go unchallenged the next time they tell it.
So, here is another fantastic red pill moment. An Aurelian moment, if you will. You are responsible for the improvement of yourself and then the outward improvement of society by being a noble, humble man internally. But feminism doesn't like masculinity. It doesn't like these stoic elements of maleness. They think that stoicism is emotionally dead. They think that being or projecting toughness outwards just fosters a violent environment. But here we have Jonathan McIntosh advocating the mobilization of this traditional masculinity to establish boundaries and expectations of other men. It is so incredibly traditionally male in the sense of a natural sense of maleness that the alpha, the leader of the pack, the head of the group, has the greatest influence on the group. And therefore, if the man who leads the group is a feminist, then the group will be subjected to feminist ideology. If a man who tells a sexist joke, clearly not a feminist, is challenged by a man who is a feminist and wins that disagreement, that engagement in some sort, enough so that he forces this other man to question his own intentions, that man can then move up in the hierarchy and continue to spread his ideology, as despicable as it is. That's not breaking down the structures and transforming the system that values masculinity like Jonathan McIntosh spoke of earlier in this video. This is entirely utilizing maleness as it currently exists to meet feminist ends.
In other words, those men can no longer count on other men to accept or go along with their sexism. Interrupting the sexist status quo is a simple yet powerful way that all men can make a difference. If you make a comment and a woman dismisses or disagrees with you, don't take it personally. She doesn't owe you anything, and her disagreement does not necessarily mean that she's angry or frustrated with you as an individual.
Holy shit! Did you hear that? Let's go back and play that little part again.
She doesn't owe you anything, and her disagreement...
She doesn't owe you anything. This sounds like Roosh fucking V all of a sudden. My goodness. And again, this is another Aurelian moment. You cannot define yourself by how others interpret you, how others perceive you, how others have judged you. Your goal as a man, and especially in traditional masculinity, in the very Aurelian stoicism masculinity, is to be driven internally by your own principles and values. You will interact with others, but you cannot let the outcome of those interactions affect you, positive or negative. You must just take that interaction for what it is, learn from it, grow, move on. Again, Jonathan McIntosh dropping truth bombs on us with the red pill. Not like the weird Reddit community, but the breaking away from the dogma.
Agreement does not necessarily mean that she's angry or frustrated with you as an individual. That being said, it's completely understandable for women to express anger about sexism. Sexism should make everyone angry. After all, most women have some first-hand experience with violence or harassment or mistreatment at the hands of men.
Violence, 10 to 15%. Harassment, total women now in the pool, 40, 50%. Mistreatment, 100%. So we just add layers. We add layers. We put the most heinous one at the front. This is the severity. The proximal effect. Harshest one first. Define how severe this is. But then we'll water it down with two other points to go from including a small subset of the population to the entirety of the population. Everyone has experienced mistreatment at some point. It's how we choose to react to it that matters. If we get mistreated, you can just nod, turn away, and be done with it. That's it. And mistreatment. Global effect on you? None. Effect on society? None. Or you could say, I was mistreated because of X, and therefore I must change laws to protect me so I am never mistreated again. It is such an oleaginous trick to engage in this form of sophistry where you start with a absolutely heinous, deplorable point which everybody agrees with. Violence, terrible. You should not be violent where it is not absolutely necessary. But then harassment, well, now we've gone away from something that's objective. Someone punching another person, that's an objective truth. If that occurred, it occurred. You can't debate whether or not, well, it wasn't really a punch. No, he struck you. There, done. To harassment, which is everything from the true demeaning, sexually inappropriate comments, the slapping of asses at work, to the peeping through locker room, to all the way down to just complimenting someone on how they look that day. That's all harassment. And then we get to the point of mistreatment. Well, mistreatment could be absolutely devoid of your gender. Someone could have fucked up your coffee order, and that's mistreatment if you're having a bad enough day.
Sometimes even men who claim to be allies. So don't get defensive if individual women don't want to engage with you. And remember that it's definitely not our job to police the ways that women may choose to speak about sexism or their experiences.
Nor is it women's job to police the way that men speak about their own issues and their own experiences with mistreatment and sexism. Women shouldn't be using feminism as a vehicle to define how other men can interact with one another. If feminism is really about removing gender-based oppression and to bring about equality between the sexes, then they should be equally concerned about elevating male voices in certain spaces, especially spaces that are dominated by women. If a man is in a social worker or a nursing program, his experience should be validated more so than the women, because those programs are 90% female. So you need that small subset, especially men of color who've entered nursing, to be heard. It becomes relative to the different communities which are interacting rather than to the entirety of the gender.
Men's support for feminism should not be seen as some kind of favor to women. As we've discussed, this...
That's not for men to determine. if men support feminism, it shouldn't be a favor towards women, and women can't define that. We can't control whether or not another person interacts that way. Oh, Jonathan McIntosh, you were so close to understanding a real stoic approach. Your actions, despite your ideology, your actions are for yourself. Sometimes you can be considered, or you can sometimes consider how those. You should always consider how the actions affect others, but you shouldn't be overly concerned about the extent to which your actions affect others. There are some things you're going to do that will upset others. That is inevitable. You cannot be a perfect human being. As such, you shouldn't completely change your behaviors to accommodate everybody else. You will be a nobody if you continue to do that. You'll be a drone, you'll be maligned, you'll be dismissed from all communities if you're a complete spineless pushover regardless of your gender. Your actions concern you. If someone else judges them, that is for them, and only them. Their judgment of your actions should not affect you. So, no, Jonathan McIntosh, it's not about favoring or bringing about favor of women. Well, at least it shouldn't be. It's too bad that through the destruction of traditional masculinity, we have taught young men now that it is about doing favors for women, and that through feminism, not only will they improve the world, they might get a little pussy in the process.
Dismantling the system of sexist beliefs benefits people of all genders. And moreover, men shouldn't expect a reward for deciding not to participate in a terrible system of oppression. Or, as many feminists have said before, you don't...
Back to the RP stuff. Here we are. You shouldn't expect benefit for your actions. You should do actions simply because it is something that you wish to do. That you, based upon your principles and your values, view to be important and imperative.
Get a cookie for being a decent human being. It's really hard to break years of socialization overnight, so messing up is inevitable. I've certainly made my fair share of mistakes. The key...
I'm sure you have. I am sure you have. Oh, I could just imagine the amount of drugs you're on in order to get that smile on your face.
The key is what you do next.
The key is what you do next after your mistakes. Are we going to get another red pill truth, another Aurelian insight?
We always have a choice in how we respond to our mistakes. So be humble, examine your own actions, acknowledge failings, and continue to learn how to be better and more supportive.
Oh, that was very close. Continue to be better. Period. Supportiveness is not necessarily inherent, but that is a very feminine quality. Most of that was very true about a stoic mindset, a traditional masculinity. Your mistakes are your own. If you fail, even if you think someone else caused you to fail, you have to take a moment and reflect. You have to say, what could I have done differently? How could I improve so that if I'm confronted with that situation again, I handle it in a better way, a more efficient way, a smarter way, a more respectful way, even, I'll go as far to say it, a more supportive way. But the most you can do is actions for yourself. If your actions benefit others, excellent. That's a noble thing to pursue. But you cannot determine how others are going to react to your actions. You must act accordingly to you, your principles and your values, and not to the concerns of what someone else ought to expect from you. You will never meet someone else's expectations, because in their mind they have layers and layers and layers of their own history, of their own experiences, of their own projections, of their own solipsism, that for you to somehow meet their expectations, you have to overcome Mount Improbable in this case.
Sexism is not necessarily something always done consciously. It's something we're socialized to think is normal.
The education camps are not working. Come on. Socialized to believe? Socialized? Again, the tabula rasa creationist bullshit. No, we are not socialized to be inherently sexist. Why would anyone want to do that in our modern society? Uh, there's just elements of our existence which are perceived to be sexist. They aren't necessarily sexist, they're just perceived to be. And that's why we've gotten to the point where women fail to understand why the AC is set to what it's at. Oh, women are cold, air conditioning is sexist. It has nothing to do with the fact that through evolution and evolutionary biology, we can understand that men and women have equal tolerance for heat and cold. Women, however, have a higher sensitivity to cold simply because that gives them a additional factor in protecting offspring. If it is cold, an adult female may be able to survive it, but her young may not be able to. So through evolution, she develops a higher sensitivity to cold, although her tolerance remains unchanged, so that when the temperature drops to a point which may be dangerous for her offspring, she is aware of it without being likely to succumb to it. That's how come air conditioning feels too cold for women. Not because men are assholes and they just set it colder.
And as such, it's something we often participate in without even meaning to. This is why challenging ourselves and reflecting on our own actions is a vital step in the process.
Ho! Ho! Oh, he looks bored now. Yes, challenging ourselves and reflecting on our actions is a vital part of the process. That's an internally important process for people. All people, not just men, but women also. This is also central to the Stoic philosophy. We have to reflect. We have to meditate on our actions, our decisions, our values at times to ensure that we remain honest to ourselves. This is a very weird video. Not only just what I've produced here, but McIntosh's video. It is very strange.
But remember to be compassionate and patient with yourself and keep working at it.
Again, another statement that is internally consistent. You're responsible for your actions. To grow, you must reflect upon your actions, and don't be too hard on yourself when you do fail. That's the message we got there. We can completely strip out all of this feminist bullshit. It almost might be worthwhile to take this video and say Jonathan McIntosh teaching Aurelian philosophy and take away all the feminist dogma and all the bullshit. I'll have like a 22-second clip, but it would be Jonathan McIntosh showing elements of masculinity which he otherwise regularly maligns. Some of this masculinity, actually most of the masculinity that I am in agreement with, that he is illustrating in this video, which I've joked about as being red pill, but is truly Aurelian in its nature, is inherently tied to the elements which McIntosh et al. Refer to as toxic masculinity. It's very strange that that cognitive dissonance can occur within him, and it's even more strange that this video can exist in its entirety, where he talks about very masculine, positive masculine traits, the utilization of masculinity to bring about change, and challenging other men for social dominance, and still, at the end of the day, think that masculinity, modern masculinity, is inherently toxic and the driving force behind why so many mass shootings in America occur, for example.
This is by no means an exhaustive list of advice, but it should give you a
For a longer list, please read The Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
place to start. Now, if you're feeling a little uneasy at this point, that might actually be a good sign. As men, the process of honestly re-examining our own assumptions and questioning our participation in sexism will often feel uncomfortable. But remember that even though we as individuals didn't create the system of patriarchy, it does manifest itself in almost every aspect of our lives, which
The invisible hand of patriarchy. It is everywhere. It's this sense that doesn't matter what you do as a man, you are still somehow culpable for it. Because as a man, you have the tendrils of patriarchy deep into your heart. You cannot break away from it at any instance.
Which means we do have a responsibility to challenge it. We must always...
And there it is. You have a responsibility to challenge patriarchy as a man. Not just other men to assert feminist demagogy, but to challenge patriarchy as a whole. Go forth, disposable men, towards the meat grinder.
Recall our potential for positive impact in the world, and be involved in this work not out of personal guilt or shame, but because, as we've discussed in this video...
Well, Mom's not here to nag us, so it's not guilt or shame which motivate us. But more to that whole red pill element, Aurelian element, yeah, the factors of guilt and shame are very poor motivators. In fact, motivation in and of itself is not very good for accomplishing one's ends. Discipline will get you far further than motivation. Motivation gets you started in a sprint to finish a marathon, only to burn out before the first mile's up. Discipline keeps a solid pace throughout and ensures that you can complete.
The desired outcome is ending gender-based oppression and making the world a better place for people of all genders, including men.
The end of the video. Well, Jonathan McIntosh has just given us a list of 5 ways men can help end sexism. We have to listen to women, educate ourselves, not get defensive, challenge other men, and learn from our mistakes. In other words, we are flawed creatures who have failed miserably in the eyes of feminism, and you should feel uncomfortable now, just as a young man should feel uncomfortable without having Jesus in his heart, and he must now go back to the Bible and re-find his faith. It's no more than ideology being spouted here. It's dogmatic adherence to ethereal concepts such as patriarchy and unprovable statements such as all women do X, or that all women have either been violently targeted, harassed, or mistreated. The video is a really strange one for how many honest male traits Jonathan McIntosh talks about in this. It's almost intentional that he would go this route to try and touch on central topics within stoicism and traditional masculinity in order to convey the message that feminism is the way for men. How feminism is meant to help all people, especially women, who've been hurt most by the current society. At least that's what our ideology has built up. Well, thank you all for watching. This was fun for me to do. It is the first vlog, so maybe in the future I'll do another. We'll see the response. Enjoy the video. Links will be in the description below for this and my personal blog. Thank you for watching.